So, in this lecture, we're going to explore some theoretical models that explain how culture impacts communication directly, particularly in healthcare settings. And cultural competency alone simply isn't enough, right? Healthcare providers, they need to understand communication dynamics so that they can ensure effective patient care. Really understanding culture itself, that's only part of the job, as we saw when we looked at those models. Right? We also need to be able to interact and communicate effectively across diverse cultural backgrounds. So today we're going to look at two intercultural communication theories. The first will be Geert Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and we're also going to look at Stella Ting Toomey's face negotiation theory. Now, one takes a macro level approach and looks at the broad cultural dimensions that impact how people behave, while the other zooms in on the individual to see how culture plays out at the micro level. So, intercultural communication, this refers to how people from different cultural backgrounds exchange information, build relationships, and navigate the different interactions that they have. So, basically, a care provider, they may be able to understand cultural competency, but still misinterpret communication cues that affect patient trust and decision making if they don't understand behavioral theories. For example, if a patient just nods silently after receiving treatment instructions, does that mean that they really agree, or are they just being polite but don't actually understand what's going on? Right? Effective healthcare communication, it goes beyond just the words people say. It requires an understanding of nonverbal cues and social norms and patient expectations. So let's explore Hofstede's theory first, which explains how cultural values shape communication styles. As we know, each culture expresses itself differently, right? The Carnival in Brazil is this like wild yearly party that's celebrating life and vibrance. But the Oban in Japan, it's this somber reflection of death and ancestry. Sweden, this is a country known for their strong social welfare system and the collectivist values they have, where they prioritize communal living and structure, while the US, of course, is deeply rooted in that kind of self reliant mentality that emphasizes individualism, free markets, and that entrepreneurial spirit, right? That pick yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. And the underlying forces that shape these cultures are known as cultural dimensions. These are social structures that shape the cultural identity of a country. So Geert Hofstede, he set out to not only map the existence of these dimensions, but to measure the presence of them in each country. So let's dig into his work. So Hofstede's cultural dimensions, they provide a structured way to compare how societies differ in values and behaviors and their different social norms. So basically their outlook on life. And each dimension, it represents a continuum, meaning that some cultures, they're going to fall somewhere along a spectrum. Neither is going to be completely one way or another for the most part. Some are going to be higher or lower, but for the most part, they're going to fall somewhere along a spectrum. And of course, it also, each dimension is relative, meaning that no culture is inherently better or worse. Individualistic cultures are not better than collectivists, they're just different. And of course, these are general references. They're like starting points for understanding people from different cultures. We should never let these take the place of individual understanding, where we actually sit down and talk with somebody. We never want to let it take the place of that. So there are six different dimensions that Hofstede measures. And the first of these is power distance. So this is a degree to where a society is okay with there being a power distance. So those that have less power, are they okay with that, or do they want there to be more equity, more equality within their society? So here's how this would play out in a healthcare setting. So a provider, let's say that they recommend a treatment plan to a patient. Now, a patient from a low power distance culture, they're going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to voice concerns. They're going to speak up. But someone in a high power distance culture, they're probably going to remain silent. They're just going to assume that the doctor knows best, even if they have concerns, because they don't want to challenge the authority of the doctor. Because whenever you're in that high power distance culture, you're okay with that power imbalance. The next would be individualism versus collectivism. This is whether a culture prioritizes personal independence or group cohesion. So in collectivist cultures, patients, they may rely more on family decision making rather than their own personal choice, versus obviously an individualist culture like the US believes a lot more in patient autonomy and less in that kind of collective decision making. Then we got masculinity and femininity. This is the emphasis on competition and achievement, which is more masculine, versus cooperation and quality of life, which is the more feminine approach. So masculine cultures, they may prioritize efficiency and technological advancements in healthcare, while feminine cultures, they emphasize patient-centered care and more holistic well-being. Now we've got uncertainty avoidance. So this is how comfortable a society is with ambiguity and risk. How much do we have to know everything versus we're okay with some things being left to chance? In high uncertainty avoidance cultures, patients, they may expect like very strict treatment protocols rather than like kind of flexible options that we might see in other cultures. Then we've got the long-term versus short-term orientation. This is whether a culture values future planning and perseverance or tradition and immediate results. So with this one here, long-term oriented cultures could focus on preventative care and future health planning versus short-term oriented cultures where they may prioritize immediate treatments and really quick solutions. And then the last one's indulgence versus restraint. So this is the extent to which people allow gratification of desires versus controlling their impulses. So indulgent cultures, they may encourage open discussions about mental health and wellness, while restrained cultures, they may stigmatize certain health conditions and really limit access to like leisure-based therapies. So now, like I said earlier, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, they provide this broad kind of macro level framework for understanding societal values and behaviors, but they don't fully explain how individuals really navigate communication within those kind of cultural structures. That's where Ting Toomey's face negotiation theory comes in. It shifts the focus from interpersonal interactions to interpersonal interactions, exploring how people manage identity, how they maintain face, and then how they also handle conflict and decision making across different cultures. So while Hofstede helps us to see the big picture of cultural tendencies, Ting Toomey, she zooms in on the personal dynamics that shape communication within those cultural contexts. Ting Toomey's work relies on a concept that's known as face. Face, it refers to a person's self-image, their identity, their ego, their reputation that they have. It's the social identity that they show in interactions, basically how they want to be known by others. And as we just learned, how people deal with disagreements, how they handle conflicts, how they assert themselves, that varies across cultures and those different dimensions that direct them. So when it comes to face, some patients may hesitate to express concerns because direct disagreement could threaten that face. It's not just protecting ourselves, we want to protect others as well. We don't want to embarrass others in a lot of different cultures, just the same as we don't want to embarrass ourselves. So we may want to avoid disagreement because that could embarrass or threaten the face of another person. Individuals from highly masculine cultures, on the other hand, they may have questions but keep them to themselves rather than risk embarrassment, right? Questions, they show you don't understand something, that shows weakness. So providers need to recognize when a patient is avoiding conflict or embarrassment and really find culturally appropriate ways to encourage open dialogue. So let's explore how different cultures approach conflict resolution and decision making in different healthcare settings. So cultures approach conflict resolution differently, right? Shaping how patients engage with healthcare providers during that decision making. So according to Ting Toomey, there's 5 different styles that determine how people respond in those decision making situations. And the first is to be obliging. This is agreement that's prioritized on preserving harmony. I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to embarrass me. I'm kind of looking to avoid this conflict. So I'm going to oblige. I'm going to align myself with you. Then there's avoiding conflict. This is minimizing conflict itself, often seen in collectivist cultures. We avoid conflict because, again, of the embarrassment that that brings and of the face kind of damage that that may cause. Then we've got the integrating. This is a collaborative approach to decision making where we're wanting to kind of come together and find a little bit of a way that we can all kind of get along with it. And then we've got the dominating. This is the more assertive approach. This is common in individualist cultures where it's more of a competitive kind of style where we want to be heard and we want to have our way out. And then, of course, there's the compromising. Compromising, that's that finding the middle ground where solutions are favored. I'm giving a little, you're giving a little, but I get a little, you get a little, right? So we all kind of come together in the end. And as you can see, if you look at this here, you can kind of tell where we can see the influence of Hofstede's cultural dimensions here as well. The more individualist a person is, the more dominating and the less avoiding they are. And the more collectivist they are, the less avoiding and the more integrating and more working towards obligation and everything that they're doing, right? So we don't want to, to embarrass anyone. We don't want to step on any toes. So we become more obliging the more collectivist that we are. So let's wrap this up with a couple of key takeaways and everything like that. So what we've seen is that intercultural communication goes beyond language, right? It's about understanding cultural expectations in the dialogue. It's about decision making and it's about conflict resolution. So Hofstede's theory explains how cultural values they can shape communication styles, while Ting Toomey's theory, it helps providers recognize indirect versus direct communication preferences. Conflict resolution styles, which we're going to talk more about next week, they really influence how patients engage in healthcare discussions. So it's something to definitely think about, right? Is culturally bound, these different cultural dimensions, how they really are impacting the way that we interact with one another, the way that we handle the conflict that we're in and everything. Very powerful kind of explanation as to why we behave the way we do. Okay, so that's it for this one. If you have any questions, brandon.schweitzer@altmancollege.edu. I look forward to working with all of you this week. Have a great week.